Okay guys, how's it going? So the DJI OSMO Action. I've had this camera for a little while now, and I think I'm a good sort of chap to be able to tell you honestly the pros and cons and my thoughts on it. What I mean by that is I'm probably the perfect consumer for this product because I use action cameras lots. You know, I'm coming at this from a GoPro. I get in the ocean lots. I mountain bike. I surf, kite surf. There's all sorts of actives type stuff that I'm going to be using this camera for. Also for family stuff and candid stuff and just general camera sort of usage. But I also produce video work on a professional level, and I will be probably using this side by side to DJI drones and full frame Sony cameras and like the GH5 and cameras like that. So I'm going to be coming at this from a professional level and from a sort of pretty much the bog standard consumer who buys an action camera because he wants to record some amazing waves that day or something like that. So I think I'm going to be bringing something to the table in terms of a reviewer that I think a few of the other reviewers haven't kind of covered, because there's quite a few good reviews out on this camera already. Philip Bloom actually did a really good video which went into great detail about the image quality of this, and most of his findings I do agree with, but there's a few things that he didn't mention that I think are going to be valuable to potential purchaser for this product. So let's break everything up into the good, the bad, and the ugly, and yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so let's jump straight into image quality. There's going to be goods and bads here. Overall, the image quality is pretty good for a video. The 4K, it does 4K 60p, which is pretty nice. I personally find the 4K 50p a little bit more manageable in terms of what bitrate there is to offer. That seems to be the sweet spot for me, 4K 50. That allows you to have a little bit of a slow motion effect, but you can still play it at regular speed and have a nice quality image. Overall, the image quality is pretty good. There's a few issues which I'm hoping that later firmware updates will fix. So firstly, it's over sharpened in my opinion. So it's coming out of camera. We're not talking about a sharp lens here. We're talking about the actual the processing of the image from the video is a little bit crunchy looking and over sharpened, and also a little bit too contrasty. Now, other DJI drones, other DJI products I should say, have, I've got the Phantom 4 Pro and I've used Mavics and other products like that, and they generally allow you to lower sharpening and have more control over your image in the settings, whereas this one doesn't. There's no option to change the sharpness level in camera. So I'm really hoping that a future update just allows you to lower that sharpening level just a little bit. That would greatly improve our options. Next thing, so in terms of dynamic range, it's, you're limited to, it's an action camera. You're not expecting too much, and so you've got this limited sort of bit of dynamic range to deal with. And so what's really important is your profiles, and we've basically got 3 profiles to work with. Normal, which in my opinion is way too contrasty. The highlights get blown out very easily, and it's too saturated. It's not bad looking. It's just it's too much. Like, it gives you zero flexibility to do anything with it on a sort of professional level. After it comes out of camera, you've got D-Cine-like, which is pretty much the same as the DJI drone D-Cine-like. So it's a flattened off, desaturated version. It's probably the one that I'm going to be using the most. It could be better, but it's not bad. It's not bad at all. It's still a bit contrasty. Like, the shadows are still a bit too dark in my opinion, but it's not too bad for what we're dealing with here. And then HDR actually has the best in terms of highlight retention and shadow information, so you'd think that would be the perfect profile to use all the time. By the way, it's just a basic 8-bit HDR. It's not like a proper 10-bit HDR. It's just a sort of economy value of HDR, but it does have the most highlight and shadow retention out of the profiles available on the camera. But what the problem is with that is that you can't use the HDR in conjunction with RockSteady. RockSteady is this camera's stabilization mode, which is a huge big thumbs up benefit, a huge pro. Is the image stabilization. It's just amazing. So it's really unfortunate that you can't use the HDR and RockSteady image stabilization at the same time, because if you could, that's what I'd be using all the time. As it is, I'd only use HDR if it was on a gimbal or on a tripod and you're just getting like a single beauty shot or something like that. So that's a bit of an unfortunate situation. So I'm probably going to end up using the D-Cine-like profile most of the time, because that gives me a little bit of flexibility and it allows me to use the RockSteady, which is really, really good. So so that's the image quality sort of covered in terms of video. Stills, you know, you've got RAW, and the stills are okay. Bear in mind that you know, this is a fisheye lens. It does have de-warp, and this is a really good big thumbs up sort of option. De-warp sort of is like linear in GoPro, but one of the big things about the de-warp in the OSMO Action is it allows you to use it in 4K. Now, as far as I know, currently there's no GoPro model that allows you to use linear in 4K. It only works in HD. So that is another big win for the OSMO as far as I'm concerned, because I don't like the fisheye look, so I'll be using the de-warp option most of the time. On the de-warp, it would be really, really nice if there was an icon on the screen for de-warp. You do get one for RockSteady. So if we turn RockSteady on, you can see there's a little RS up here, which shows you that RockSteady is turned on. But there's no icon for de-warp, which is a shame, because it actually it randomly turns it off every now and again. So that's a bit of a niggle for me. Like, I do wish the de-warp is brilliant and you can use it in 4K, but it randomly turns itself off. Like, normally I think when the camera turns on and off, it sort of defaults back to a normal setting without it on, and it doesn't tell you whether it's on or not on the screen, on the heads up, so you have to go into the settings to turn it back on. So that's a little niggle, but it's still really nice that you've got de-warp in 4K. So getting back to the stills, the de-warp works with the JPEGs, and the JPEGs are okay coming out of it. But if you want to use your RAWs, then the de-warp is then switched off, so you're then going to have to correct your images. You know, the fisheye effect, you're going to have to correct those manually if you're using the RAW images. So bear that in mind, because that's something that only works for the JPEGs. But the stills coming out of it are kind of what you'd expect. They're okay. In terms of low light performance, it's just really very poor. I mean, you wouldn't expect it to be good with a tiny little sensor like this, but it really is very, very, very not good at all. It gets mushy and grainy very, very quickly. You know, we're not even talking about really bad light. We're just talking about, like, you know, inside in a pub with like middling kind of lighting, not great lighting. Like, even that would start to look a bit mushy. It really is a good light camera, a fair weather camera. In sunlight, outdoors, daylight, you're okay. You could do nighttime stuff if it's long exposure on a tripod stills or time-lapse. It will do that, and it does give you full manual control, so you can do your 10-second exposure or 20-second exposure and that kind of thing. So it can do low light time-lapses and still shots, but video, it's low light, it's just terrible. So don't use this in low light at all unless you absolutely have to. Another thing about that, talking about the RockSteady image stabilization, which is amazing. So let's just quickly talk about that. Here's a clip of me just walking along the street with the image stabilization turned off. Here's a clip with it turned on, and that's just holding the camera, you know, lightly in front of me on the chest here. And as you can see, it is genuinely surprisingly good. As you might have seen from a previous video, but I side-by-sided it with the GH5 IBIS, and the GH5 IBIS is amazing, and this is better. The RockSteady image stabilization is better. But coming back to our low light conversation, the image stabilization only works in good light because you need the high shutter speed, otherwise you get lots of weird motion blur artifacting going on all over the place. So the RockSteady image stabilization is brilliant, really, really good, but again, it needs to be in good light. It will not work very well at all in bad light, because you'll get sort of blurring and mushing and artifacting and stuff like that. So it really is a fair weather, bright light camera for those two reasons. So yeah, that's a little chat about there's a few pros and cons there. Like I said, it's bad that you can't use the HDR and RockSteady at the same time, because that would be a perfect, you know, for me, that would be the perfect scenario and the perfect choice to use it the whole time. The de-warp feature is brilliant, that you can use that in 4K, because I really don't like that fisheye look. And if you are going to cross edit between, you know, cameras with decent lenses, you don't really want to have that fisheye look. It's going to help it fit into a professional workflow much better, because you lose a tiny bit of image quality, like a tiny bit with the de-warp on. But it's, you know, generally it does a really good job, and straight lines look straight, you know, the horizon becomes straight, you don't get that bendy horizon line. Buildings, you know, have normal verticals and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a really good option. Okay, so let's move on to some other things. Oh yeah, and another thing I should say about the RockSteady is you do get a lag on the screen. So if we turn the RockSteady on, which is on, and if you now look at the screen on there, we'll just wait for that to focus. And if you see how I'm moving the camera, you see there's a bit of a lag. That's the RockSteady creating that lag, because you don't get that lag if we just turn it off. And then if you turn it off, so that's without the RockSteady turned on. As you can see, you don't get the lag. So there's a bit of a lag, which personally for me, it's not a big deal. It's just you know, it's a minor inconvenience. Generally, if I'm following some fast action, I will just follow it, look at the subject, and then pan round. I kind of use the screen to frame up my subject beforehand. And you know, it gives you an awareness of what you're actually recording, obviously. But if you're just staring at the screen and recording things, that lag will interrupt your, you know, getting fast moving objects a little bit. So bear that in mind. There's a bit of a lag, but it's a minor inconvenience in my opinion. Okay, so regarding another one of the big features of this, which is pretty new to action cameras, is the front screen. You know, we've had the little front screen on the Pocket. Well, it's not really a front screen, but you know, a screen that you can look at for like vlogging and that kind of situation. But now we have a little front screen on our action camera, and to switch that, you can either double tap on the back, and that will then flip it to the back. You can't have both screens working, by the way. You can't have the front and the back working, only the front or the back, front or the back. Or you can hold on this side button here, and then that flicks round to the front. Now for me personally, I prefer being behind the camera than in front of it, so it's not necessarily a big deal. But I still think it's pretty neat, you know, if you're into vlogging or you know, casual YouTube content, or just selfies and stuff, and having a screen on the front that you can frame yourself in, it's pretty good. You know, it's pretty neat. I think it's, for some people that will be a deal breaker. For some people it'll be like, meh, you know, it's kind of cool. But for me, it's a bit of a meh, but it's still a nice option to have. Okay, so let's talk about some other good aspects. So it comes with this little cage here. It's a little bit fiddly to get in and out, and annoyingly you can't access the battery socket to charge it when it's in that case. So you have to keep taking it in and out of the case. Just a little skeleton case basically, but it is one of the pros, I would say, for this camera, and the reason for that is simply this little thing here, because that is GoPro compatible. So if you've got your, you know, millions of GoPro accessories already, like I've got mouth mounts, you know, mouth mounts, I should say, hard to say that, you know, selfie sticks and various different, you know, types of GoPro accessories already, it will fit straight onto those devices, those options, you know, chest mounts and all the rest of it. So that for me is a big plus, because I've got tons of GoPro stuff already. I will say though that certain specific devices, like for instance the wearable gimbal that's designed for GoPro and things like that, it doesn't actually work on these. So the ones that I've got a couple of different ones. Your mileage may vary depending on the strength of the gimbal. But some of these 3-axis gimbals, they're so finely tuned that a tiny shift in weight or size or whatever is enough to put them out. And personally, I can't actually get my Osmo Action to work on any of the GoPro gimbals, because its dimensions are a bit different, and I think it's a bit heavier as well, and it's a bit sort of wider, so the weight sort of hangs off one side. So that goes into the negative in terms of, you know, being fussy. But in terms of, it's a big positive that this will work with the vast majority of GoPro accessories once it's in the case like that, because it is very similar proportions, and that goes straight onto all the GoPro mounts like very, very, very easily. So that's a big plus. Okay, so in terms of ease of use, it's very easy to use and very, very intuitive. All of the menus are very easy to access. You just pull down, pull across, and you get into everything you need to get to. And the touchscreen works pretty much how you would expect it to. You've also got this quick switch button on the side there, so you can cycle through your options. So you've got a nice physical button there to get through all your various options. You've got, you know, turn on and put screen sleep button there, and then record there, and that's it. So it's very, very nice and simple to use, very easy to use. But there is a big downside to the touchscreen in terms of, as soon as it gets wet, it goes haywire. Now there is a way to lock it. So you just pull down and press on the lock icon like that, and that locks the back screen so that water doesn't affect it anymore. So then you have to just use the physical buttons, which means you have less control, obviously, because, you know, if you there's only so many things you can set up with the physical buttons, so many things you can do. You can't really access, you know, some of the more unused features, or go into like finer details of spot metering and doing all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the user interface is brilliant, but as long as your fingers and this camera remains dry. Now obviously it will work when it's wet, like the camera works when it's wet, but the back screen just goes haywire. The first time I took it out kite surfing, I was getting water spray, you know, hitting the screen, and then when I got into the beach, I realised that all my settings had changed. It changed the exposure values. It had gone haywire basically, because all these little splashes of water were landing on the screen and just changing random settings. So obviously I should have had it locked so that wouldn't have happened. But that is a factor. So if you intend to buy this for surfing and you're out in the water and you want to change your settings, you literally have to get out of the water, dry your hands, dry the camera off to operate the screen successfully, at least from my experience anyway. So that's good and bad. If the camera's dry, the user interface is brilliant. If the camera's wet, it's a nightmare. Okay, so what other things we have? The voice control is actually surprisingly much better than I expected it to be. It's not something that I'm going to use very much, but you've got option to quite a few different things here. So let's have a quick look. You've got start recording, stop recording. There you go. It's already doing it. Stop recording. There we go. Take a photo. Take a photo. Take photo. Screen switch. I think I've just forgotten some of the... Anyway, it was doing it. I've forgotten what some of the voice commands are, but essentially it works. It works surprisingly well. It's not something I'm going to use very often, and I did find that I was actually testing it out, and I was chatting to my other nerdy friend about camera stuff, and we were talking about turning off settings and all this kind of stuff, and every time I was saying, like, you know, turn off or switch on or start recording, it was doing it even though I wasn't talking to it. So so yeah, but bear in mind it does kind of listen, and it might accidentally hear something which sounds similar to take a photo, and then it will take a photo randomly. So yeah, that's another sort of, I'll put that in the pro category, but for me personally it's not a sort of a biggie either way. Okay, so what else have we got here? So in terms of the audio, the mic, it's actually it's better than you might think. You know, and it's an action camera. If it's going to be getting wet, or if you've got wind hitting it, the audio is not going to be coming out very well. But it's better than you might expect. It's better than I expected. You know, for what it is. So the audio mic on this, just for some basic you know, vlogging to camera in a sort of fairly windless environment, you know, not noisy environment, I think you'd get a pretty good quality audio. So yeah, I would give that a thumbs up. Okay, so let's get into some other things. So I've tested everything on this. I've tested all the different modes, every different possible mode going. In terms of the slow motion, I would just put in that in the okay category. It's not brilliant, but it's not terrible. Like, it is, you will get some nice results using it, but it's a little bit crunchy looking, and you know, a little bit, there's jaggies and moire. But you know, I'd say it was roughly on par with the GoPro. The GoPro will be, I think, slightly better than this in terms of the slow motion, but it's not a huge amount in it, so don't worry too much. I will say though, on that subject, one of the niggles for me is that in the in your basic, you know, quick menu options, slow motion is one of the options in there. But even when you select 50 Hertz as your frequency deflicker option, which you'd think that would then set it to PAL, P-A-L, PAL. So I'm in PAL zone. You know, I'm in the UK. If you're in NTSC, it's not a problem. But what I'm trying to get at here is that if you just do the basic slow motion menu options, you basically get 1080. You get 8 times and 4 times basically as your two options. which is all fine. Press record, film away, and then you get home and you realise that it's done the slow motion for you. It's conformed it to a 30p file, so you end up with a 30p, 30 frames per second file, which is useless for me because I work in 25p. So it's a bit that I'm presuming that will be a firmware update option, because it's ridiculous that it doesn't do that automatically. When you select 50 Hertz, it should then conform your automatic files to 25p basically. So yeah, that's annoying, but there is a workaround which is fairly straightforward. If we just get into the actual settings, you can just basically scroll across. It's going to be difficult for me to do this while it's recording, but you can basically scroll across to 1080p, and then you can go through all your frame rates down here, and then it will basically just record in that higher frame rate. So you'll end up with a 240 frames per second clip basically, so it won't be in 25p, and then you'll just have to manually stretch that clip in your timeline to work. So that, that's a workaround. It's not perfect, but it's also not a big deal either, but it's still a bit of a niggle that they haven't sorted out some of the stuff for us power users right now. The fact it automatically comes out at 30p. You can, of course, for your standard recording, you can choose 25p in there as a standard recording option in the 4K and in the 1080 and all the rest of it. But it's just for the slow motion, the specifically slow motion menu options. It just defaults to 30p and you can't change it, which is a bit odd. So like I said, slow motion quality is okay, but nothing to write home about. Okay, so other things. So the time-lapse feature, the time-lapse functions works pretty well. As far as I can tell, I've been going right through the menu and it doesn't seem to give you the raw option, so it doesn't do raw time-lapse. It will do raw single stills, but it defaults to video, but you can also choose video and JPEG. Now if you're going to do time lapses with this, I highly recommend you turn dewarp on to get rid of the fisheye effect, and then use the JPEGs basically, because the JPEGs are better quality than the video file, because it will create both for you. What it does with the video file, it adds that contrasty effect again to the video file, so the black you lose all the shadow information basically, and it clips the highlights a bit sooner. It's not a huge difference, but if you're using time lapse, use the JPEGs coming out of this rather than the video, because they are higher quality, and it's a pretty good option. You have full manual control. You can slow your shutter right the way down for your low light nighttime time lapses and all that kind of stuff. So generally it's pretty good, but it doesn't give you the raw option for time lapse as far as I can tell, unless a firmware update changes that sometime soon. Okay, so let's talk about a couple other negatives. One of them is kind of a one-time annoyance, so it shouldn't really be a big deal, but I think people should be aware of it. When you first buy the camera, you have to download the app and you have to log on to DJI before it will even let you take a single photo or a single video, which I find ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. This isn't a drone, this isn't something you're going to be flying over an airport and creating problems with. It's just a little action camera, so they shouldn't make you log on just to use the thing. And actually, for me, I went out with a bunch of different cameras the first time I was using it. Tripods, had it all set up, ready, fully charged battery, had SD card in there, and I was ready to roll. And I realised that I couldn't record anything. It kept on flashing up this, the download the DJI app message on the back of the screen, and it wouldn't let me get around it. And I was out in the middle of nowhere with no service, so I couldn't I had no 3G, so I couldn't download the app onto my phone, so I couldn't log on, I couldn't do anything. So that day I didn't get anything recorded with this camera, because it forces you to download the app and log on to DJI, for the warranty and all that stuff. I find that kind of ridiculous. I know it's only a one-time thing, so it's a one-time inconvenience, and most people might do that on their first day of getting it before they go out in the field, like I should have done, but it's still irritating, to say the least. So that gives a big thumbs down for me, but again, not a deal breaker, because it's just a one-time inconvenience. Another downside I would say on this is there's no super view, and what I mean by that is, so I get very much used to using GoPros. And if you're using your GoPro like mounted on you, like on a helmet for a mountain bike, or on your body, on your chest mount or something like that, and for instance, if I'm surfing or kite surfing, you want the widest field of view you can possibly get. And I know that the super view on the GoPros is quite distorted, like it's a bit weird looking, but it is the best sort of way of capturing everything that's going on when the camera's right on your body, because it can see most of everything. So like for instance, if I'm surfing or kite surfing, if the camera's in my mouth or on my head or something, it often really can't see your feet, and it can't see the board, and it can't see as much of the wave. So so that's a bit of an issue. And obviously if you have your de-warp turned on and you have your RockSteady stabilization turned on, that actually crops it in quite a lot as well. So you're getting a narrower field of view. Obviously you don't need those turned on, but I'm just explaining that, you know, they do crop in a fair amount, so you lose some of that experience stuff. For being a for filming somebody else, it's much better, so that you've got the narrower, steadier shot. But when you're actually filming yourself doing stuff, not having the super view is a little bit of a niggle for me. It wouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker, but it's just a bit of a shame that they haven't got that option, because the sensor is obviously, you know, the field of view of the lens is very similar to a GoPro, and the sensor is larger than the field of view of what you get for your standard video shot. So it's only a matter of them adding that option in there, basically, to do a scan of the entire sensor. And I wouldn't even mind if it wasn't necessarily for, like, say if they only did it for 1080, do you know what I mean? So it wasn't in 4K, but it would just give you the option to have that wider view if you needed it. So that is a bit of a downside, but you know, again, it's not a deal breaker, but bear that in mind. If you're used to your super view on your GoPro, you don't have it in this, so you might miss it. Okay, and so one other thing, in terms of dealing with the footage coming out of camera, now I use all different types of cameras, you know, Sony's, Panasonics, you know, I've stuff coming off of you know, in ProRes, H.265, H.264. I deal with all different types of footage, and the two types of footage that my Mac doesn't like is the footage coming out of this and the footage coming out of my Phantom 4 Pro. They both have they're both in H.264, but there's just something particular about the DJI footage that Mac it doesn't like, in terms of, you know, Premiere, the Adobe suite, doesn't like it that much. It can work it can use it, it just doesn't play smoothly. So you either have to transcode it first to make the editing experience smoother and easier, or you have to you know, just put up with a stuttering sort of playback. I know it's just a niggle, and it's probably is just us Macs using Premiere. Probably PC people don't have this issue. I've tried. It gives you the option of MP4 or MOV, and I've tried it in both, and it does it in both. So bear that in mind. If you know, compared to the GoPro footage, which my machine eats up easily and you know, has no problem with, it's a little bit more stuttery to edit with. Like I said, if you have a DJI drone already, you probably already know this, because they tend to all do that as well. But there's something about the way the codec is put together coming out of DJI. It doesn't make the smoothest editing experience. It can be done, and certainly it's going to be system dependent, but if you're like me on a Mac and you use Adobe, then you're probably going to find the same experience, that it's a bit stuttery. So that's another little bit of a negative of this camera. Okay, so a couple of the little things. So the screen brightness, it's not terrible. Like, it really isn't terrible. But when you're out in sunlight, it's not brilliant. It's kind of, I would just put it in the okay category. You know, it's not terrible, but it's not brilliant. I've seen brighter screens. It's on, if you've got a GH5 or a Sony, it's on a par with those screens, so you know what you're going to be getting in terms of, you know, dealing with it in bright sunlight. It's doable, but it could be better. But you know, it's a little action camera, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one. Okay, so finally, battery life. Battery life is, in my experience, a bit better than the GoPro. So it's okay. I wouldn't say it was amazing. I wouldn't say it was terrible. I haven't done a non-stop recording test, but I've taken it out for, you know, 3 hours with lots of recording, you know, start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. And it's lasted, you know, pretty much around about 2.5, 3 hours, around in that sort of area. But that's starting recording, stopping recording, starting recording. That's not continuous recording. I've got a feeling continuous recording would probably be about an hour, around about that sort of category, before you have to change the battery. It's not too difficult to charge the battery out and about if you have one of those little mobile, you know, power bank things, and you just plug the USB in the side, and then wait for, you know, a couple of hours where it charges or something. So, you know, it has that option basically, but obviously having 3 spare batteries would probably cover you for a long day of shooting on and off, basically. So I would advise getting a couple of batteries. At the moment, spare batteries, I can't get them for love nor money. They're quite hard to get hold of, but no doubt they'll catch up with that as soon as the you know, more and more people are ordering them, they're going to start producing them quicker. So anyway, so there you go. I think that's covered just about everything. So my final thoughts are, generally it has loads of really amazing pros. It has loads of aspects which are just you haven't really got in any other camera. You've got the front screen, which is a really nifty little addition. The RockSteady image stabilization is just amazing, like surprisingly good, like really surprisingly good. The overall quality is pretty damn good. Image quality, I would just say if they could just get a software update, a firmware update, and include a sharpness lowering option, and maybe if they could cram that HDR into other modes, in terms of have RockSteady and HDR at the same time, then I'd be much happier with my image coming out of the camera. Like I said, using the thing is really easy. It's a shame that the touchscreen isn't a little bit more advanced in terms of being able to deal with water. I know water on touchscreens is always difficult, but I mean the iPhone, you can deal with getting the iPhone fairly wet and it still works okay as a touchscreen, whereas this thing kind of freaks out. So again, it's possible that's a firmware update thing. Probably not though, just because I would imagine that's quite baked in terms of the touchscreen, how it works. But for some people who don't go in the ocean, don't go swimming a lot with their cameras, that's not a deal at all. But overall, yeah, I think it's an amazingly good competitor to the GoPro, because it does things the GoPro doesn't do, and it does some things not quite as good as the GoPro. So you really are just going to have to weigh it up. But outside of that, it does some things. It's mainly the image stabilization. That's the thing that's blown me away the most. So if that's a big deal for you, and you really want that smooth shot, and you want those shots in 4K, then this is great. And the 4K 60 can form down to like 24 or 25p. That gives you a nice quality slow motion. It's not epic. It's still a little bit crunchy looking. But yeah, overall, I don't know, I guess I'd give it something like a 7.5 out of 10. It's so hard because it's got so many really good bits and then a few bits that just niggle you. So yeah, I think we'll go with that, 7.5 out of 10. I think that's fairly fair. Okay guys, so I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to cover. There's a couple other little videos on my channel showing you a couple quick edits coming out of it and my favourite settings and things like that. But I really hope that was quite useful, and I hope I covered everything that you may or may not want to know. By all means, ask me some questions down below if I forgot anything, or if there's any really specific technical questions that you want answered, because I've ripped this thing to bits, and there's a lot more information I know about this thing than I've given you, just because I didn't want the review to get too long. Anyway, but yeah, like I said, questions down below, and I'll try to answer anything that's that I can, basically. Okay, peace out guys, and I hope this was useful. Okay, so here's a test, sort of walking and just holding the camera. This is the mics built into the Osmo. It's raining today, so I'm getting a bit wet. So this should give you a good idea. That's arm's length. That's holding it a little bit more with bent elbow, a little bit more comfortably. So hopefully you can hear what's going on. And so testing 1 2 3. This should give you a good idea how good the audio is. It's raining, there's birds, I can hear motorway over there. I'm not sure if you're picking that up, but just to give you an idea, it's a pretty quiet day, but it's a pretty standard example of what the audio should sound like. Anyway, hope that was useful.